This month marks the 1-year anniversary of the Switch 2. Nintendo celebrated this milestone with a direct showcasing their lineup of first and third-party support for the remainder of 2026 and going into 2027. I like sharing my thoughts on modern games every now and then, and this is a good opportunity to cover a huge swath all at once. Fair warning, I don't have an interest in most of what is shown, but I'll try to explain why instead of just saying this game sucks. If nothing else, I hope you can walk away from this video with something to think about, even if you disagree with me. Also, this is more of a critique against the industry than Nintendo themselves. Ironically, Nintendo is one of the last developers making games I want to play, even if this direct did little to prove that. The headlining game is a sequel, which sets expectations for the rest of the direct. As with everything in life, you want to start and end strong. That's what people will remember most. To lead with Rhythm Heaven means Nintendo has faith in this being a strong title, and maybe it is in Japan. Japan has a strong rhythm game scene. A lot of their arcades are filled with stuff like Mai Mai and Sound Voltex, not so much classic beat-em-ups and shoot-em-ups. Creating a sequel for a rhythm game is tricky since most of the time you can get away with releasing individual songs or clusters of tracks as expansions for the base game. Rhythm Heaven's gimmick is turning each song into a minigame, and that concept lends itself well to a sequel. These aren't just new songs, they're accompanied by different visuals. And the concept itself is easy to grasp from the visuals alone, plus from the understanding that this is a rhythm game, obvious from its title. But Nintendo's developed a bad habit of narrating the obvious, which not only pads the length of their presentations, that comes across as pretentious. During their Metroid Prime 4 arc, they tried to make opening doors and flipping switches sound like novel creations.
These powers allow Samus to operate mechanisms and to open doors with the power of her mind.
They're replicating that tone with Rhythm Heaven. I understand Nintendo wants to portray themselves as fun for all ages, rather than catering to one specific group, but I think it's demeaning to people of all ages to spell out for them the concept of how a rhythm game works.
Just get into the groove and press the correct button. That's all there is to it.
They also feel compelled to show the player's action in the top right corner to further illustrate the fact that yes, this is a rhythm game, despite the game itself not showing that prompt, as pointed out by their disclaimer. There exists this disparity between the people marketing the game and the people creating it, where the advertising group in Nintendo wants to show players how these games are played, as if that's a vital part of their marketing strategy. We also saw this with their 15th Star Fox remake. Ironically, I think this hurts the presentation of the game. By showing the action entailed and seeing how little input is demanded, it overly simplifies what the game is about. This minigame is presented as a press A simulator. Regarding the game itself, there's a compulsory RPG mode because the average modern gamer seems to be receptive towards RPG elements and everything. I don't know if they think RPG progression adds depth, but in many cases it supplants skill. I cover that subject in my Hades 2 video. As a lifelong fan of RPGs, I have to admit that even I'm exhausted from seeing these elements appear in non-RPGs. If Rhythm Heaven was conceptualized as an RPG rhythm game hybrid from the beginning, like Theater Rhythm, then I wouldn't mind. Not to say I dislike this mode, but it's representative of the stagnant state of the industry. But I do like the inclusion of local co-op. The Switch's hardware lends itself naturally to co-op games, and I'm always happy to see this. I played the demo and have a lot to say about this game. Too much for this video, so I'll try to be concise. This isn't Onimusha, just straight up, it's not. I'll explain why, but just because this isn't Onimusha doesn't mean it's a bad game. I'm open to change, I like new things, a sequel can change and do different things, so long as it retains its core identity. Changing too much risks alienating existing fans because that core appeal is lost, and that's what happened with Onimusha 5. Onimusha at its core is defined by its movement. The original games employed fixed camera angles and tank controls. Those two systems go hand in hand, and you can certainly call that a trend from the era. Plenty of games use fixed angles and tank controls. It was popular much in the same way that over-the-shoulder angles and stick-controlled cameras are popular nowadays. But by changing the camera, you radically change the way the game is played. It seems like a simple change, but it has a domino effect on almost every single gameplay system. Onimusha's combat is positioning dependent. Attacks don't exhibit extreme magnetism like you see in modern action games. If you press attack and you're not near an enemy, you don't gravitate towards it to ensure the attack lands, you whiff. This means that the act of approaching an enemy is dangerous. You don't have a large attacking hitbox that will carry you towards them. That approaching aspect leaves you vulnerable, which is why pressing back on the D-pad gives you this huge backdash. This is your emergency exit. Similar to the Resident Evil 1 remake, combat entails a lot of moving towards and away from enemies to bait attacks, and also similar to RE1 remake, if you play the modern port with analog controls, you completely eliminate the nuance of movement and break the combat wide open. These games are not clunky or outdated, and they did not need analog movement. They were deliberately designed around your movement restrictions. Even though this uses tank controls, you have a quick turn button. You can cover your backside immediately with zero momentum involved. It's snappy, which means that enemies can be more aggressive. They account for your ability to quick turn. Even though enemies move fast, you have a stance button that lets you strafe in relation to your locked on target. You have movement options beyond simple tank controls, and because they're mapped to different buttons, the timing of these actions plays into the rhythm of combat. There's skill asked of the player to execute quick turns and sidestep attacks, rather than just freely moving around. Onimusha 5 employs free range movement. The camera is placed behind your back, attacks exhibit magnetism, dashing is gone, replaced with a traditional dodge, you have momentum when stepping from a move position, and it's even more sluggish when turning 180 degrees. The depth perception afforded by fixed camera angles is diminished with this new perspective, which is why there's aggressive magnetism, and why enemies are more passive, and why combat devolves into timing parries. Onimusha's always had Arisen, which is a one-hit kill counter, but it doesn't function like a traditional parry. The timing is tight and it differs from weapon to weapon. More often than not, you'll trigger it by accident, and that's okay because none of the games expect you to rely on Arisen to clear them. It's an added layer of depth for those that seek mastery. Onimusha 5 is designed with parrying in mind. You have 3 distinct types of parries in addition to Arisen. Because of how strong parrying is, enemies are given stamina bars to compensate. Now, just like Sekiro, you can exhaust an enemy's stamina to perform a finisher. Since we're showing an enemy's stamina gauge, might as well also show their health bars. Gone is needing to guess how much health an enemy has left and determining if it's worth it to finish him off or slip past. In fact, the entire aspect of running past enemies is diminished because the map isn't separated by loading screens. Enemies unnaturally give up the pursuit even though they have no reason to. The only thing that could be considered remotely Onimusha here is absorbing souls, but even that misses the point of this mechanic. Absorbing souls in the past games required you to stand still. It was a commitment, and you were vulnerable during this action. You lock your feet and try to snatch the souls before they disappear, but the enemies can still hit you. If there's a health or a magic soul floating around, you need to decide if you can afford to absorb them. If there are too many enemies on the screen, you probably need to forsake those souls, or focus on dodging the enemies to get into a safe spot. Genma Onimusha built on this system with green souls, incorporating a layer of tug-of-war. Onimusha 5 lets you absorb souls while moving, erasing every last bit of that depth and undermining the entire point of this mechanic. So I'm going to cut myself off here before this turns into a full-blown Onimusha video, but look at how radically different this game functions when compared to the older games. In my eyes, it doesn't resemble Onimusha in any capacity. It functions like every other modern action game that takes inspiration from Batman, Assassin's Creed, and Sekiro. If you like those games, maybe you don't see an issue here, but I don't think it's out of line to expect a series older than all of those to stick a little bit closer to its roots. So even though this isn't Onimusha, do I still like it? No, not really. I can pretend this game is called Samurai Man and I still wouldn't be interested. And can we please stop with the talking cuff stuff already?
You listen here.
I won't answer. Questions or otherwise. To Gauntlet Lady.
Yeah, okay, that is something I do now. I do magic, talk to sentient cuffs, kill jacked up beasts. You know what? I'll probably fly next.
Now you're just being ridiculous.
After spending 2 years in hibernation, Dragon's Dogshit 2 returns. This game was such an immense disappointment that it's the reason why I started a YouTube channel. My first video covers this game, and though I don't think it's a great video, all the points I made still apply. I'm sure for most players this Dark Arisen expanded version will assuage their issues with the anemic base game, but that's not the case for me. Dragon's Dogma 2 is an unfinished game. It repeats all the same mistakes of its predecessor, just with a larger map. During interviews, director Itsuno said that Dragon's Dogma 2 is what he wanted the first game to be. A game with sparse enemy variety, tons of uneventful running around empty terrain, stupid pawn AI, a rush story that abandons characters as soon as it introduces them, ham-fisted romance elements, stealth missions that don't require even a split second of sneaking, imbalanced vocations, and a short post-game that holds the best content. Except in Dragon's Dogma 2, that post-game is timed, whereas in the first game you could savor it for as long as you wanted. Itsuno left the company shortly after the game release, so I can only imagine he was thrilled with his experience and decided to take a well-deserved vacation in the Bahamas, leaving his colleagues to clean up his mess. Like the Dark Arisen expansion for the first game, this Dark Arisen expansion isn't being developed by Itsuno, meaning it has a chance of being somewhat competent. But if you consider that the base game costs $70, remains unfinished, and still runs abhorrent 2 years later, the prospect of spending even more money to potentially play a slightly better game doesn't sit well with me. In a fair and just universe, this would have been a free expansion as an apology. In this universe, people will defend this publicly traded corporation for charging for this. A port of a 2-year-old game with no added content, not even a Zero Suit Samus suit for Eve or something tacky like that. The Bayonetta Switch port added different costumes based off Nintendo characters. Maybe this port will have unique content, but it wasn't advertised here, and this was a prime opportunity to do so. I don't see anything wrong with making games multi-platform, giving more players an opportunity to enjoy them, but this really does look to be like a straightforward port. I wonder why this needed to be highlighted in a direct, especially with the lengthy gaps between each direct. I would have thought they'd make these all killer, no filler. This could have been an article on a gaming website. A new IP and it's exclusive. But that's not the most shocking part. What's shocking is that a new game is being advertised with gameplay rather than showing off its cutscenes, which tells me that this is a bona fide game and not a film. Pretty nice. This is a co-op game where you need to assist each other to solve puzzles, and the selling point here looks to be its mishmash of different gameplay styles. At one point it's a third-person shooter, then a rhythm game, then a side-scrolling platformer. This is a trend indie devs have been leaning into in recent years, this blending of genres. That variety comes at the expense of depth, because the time it takes to develop these different playstyles takes away from the time it takes to solidify one really great idea. I doubt any of these gameplay systems feel fleshed out, and by the time you tire of one idea, it presents the next. Might be fun for a playthrough with a friend, but I doubt it's the type of game I'd want to revisit. On the plus side, you can game share it with a friend, which is a feature I always love to see. A remake of a critically acclaimed game that you can already buy on modern hardware. So my chief complaint with remakes is this. Resources are being used that could have been spent making something entirely new or remaking a more deserving game. Rarely are the appropriate games being selected for a remake. Even though I'm against remakes, this could have been an opportunity to remake the first Rayman. It's a little older and more forgotten, making it a prime target to introduce to a younger audience. Even better would be making a brand new 2D or 3D entry. People that enjoyed Rayman Origins were thrilled when Legends first released, and I think they would have been thrilled to see a brand new game again. Are you thrilled to play the same game with a few new features? Maybe you are, and I won't judge you if that's your taste, but I can't help but wonder if you'll be singing that same tune in another 10 years when Legends is remade for the second time. Spoiler for the end of this video.
Get lost with friends.
Friend slop. If this looks like a mobile game, that's because it is. This is made by Kairosoft, a well-known mobile game developer. Well known for shoveling out the exact same game with a different theme every few months. Game Dev Story was made in 1997, so we're coming up on 30 years of reusing that same formula. This sort of game is a perfectly acceptable time waster for phones, especially in the early 2010s when ports of console games like Grand Theft Auto and Resident Evil were rare. You spent $4, tapped on some menus for a few hours and pretended like you were designing a mall, and that was it. Then they released the same thing 2 months later, but you were designing a town in feudal Japan. I'm sure this will also be on cell phones at some point, because look at it. This isn't a console game. 15 years ago, this would be a $4 cell phone game like Mega Mall Story. Today, this is probably 20 bucks. I want to take this opportunity to highlight the fact that Pokopia is getting expansion content before Mario Kart World. Mario Kart 8 suffered from a weak launch on the Wii U, but years of support bolstered it into a celebrated game. Instead of learning a lesson from the development journey of working on Mario Kart 8, Nintendo appears content to let World languish in a content drought for its first year, just like its predecessor. I love Mario Kart World. It's probably my favorite game from last year, which isn't saying much, but it's in a desperate need of new content if it has any hope of justifying its ridiculous $80 price tag. 8 races and Knockout Tour is laughable, especially when you consider the open world structure of this game. There should be 100 different permutations of Knockout Tour, and it wouldn't even entail creating new content. Drag and drop the order of the tracks and you've got a new race. New in quotes, but it beats repeating the same 8 layouts for a full year. As for the Pokopia expansion, I really dislike what Season Passes have become. A Season Pass used to entail a bundle of smaller DLCs that you purchased in bulk for a slight discount. Not anymore. You can't buy these individual releases separately, so it's not a bundle, it's one DLC. Why even call it a pass at this point? It's just an expansion, but they don't want to release it all at once. And suppose you don't want one of these chunks. Well, too bad, you can't opt out of it, it's all or nothing. This has been the case with Pokemon games for a while, so I guess Pokemon fans really don't care in the slightest. I have turned massively on Fire Emblem. I used to like this series, but now, couldn't care less. I already felt the fatigue settle in with Fates, but 3 Houses was the straw that broke the camel's back. This series has always had romance elements, and I never cared for that aspect of Fire Emblem, but at least they were easy to ignore. Then 3 Houses decided Fire Emblem should be a full-blown Persona sim, rife with socializing and juggling your free time as the calendar counts down towards the next mission. Also, let's make each campaign 60 hours long. This is another $80 game, by the way, and the $120 special edition sold out on day 1, just to give you an idea of how well Nintendo knows their fanbase. Engage dialed back the Persona aspect a bit, which for me was much appreciated, but everyone that started with 3 Houses called foul on Engage. They needed their Persona fix, so in comes Fortune's Weave to give them what they wanted. The calendar system is back, so there goes the pacing. Looks like 4 separate campaigns, just like 3 Houses, so it's 200 hours long again. This time with a giant map that has hundreds of filler missions. At some point this was a strategy series, but now it's a dating sim with some strategy combat. Fire Emblem fans seem to be okay with this since their favorite pastime is making character tier lists for each game. And doubtless this new one will give them plenty of material to chew on. Little disappointed to see the tight pacing of the older games being forsaken, but the introduction of casual mode in Awakening, coupled with the series' explosive popularity starting with that release, is an obvious omen in retrospect. Permadeath is what lends tension to each map and enforces strategic decision making, and now it's optional to accommodate players that are in it for the dating sim. I'd question why you'd want to play a strategy game and not strategize, but at the very least this series still caters to hardcore players. It's optional, but it's there. If only you could skip the Persona stuff. I can admit that this series is not for me, so I'm stepping away from it. There are plenty of strategy games to choose from, I don't need to get hung up on Fire Emblem. This one made me scratch my head. Not the $5 Emerald Rush DLC that Nintendo's charging $20 for, the limited time single player content. Why is this a thing? Nintendo at random will timegate their content. Here's Mario 35, then 6 months later it's gone. Here's Super Mario All-Stars for 1 year and then it's gone. Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, come and gone with the wind. Giving more value to an overpriced DLC would have been nice, and maybe enough of an incentive to coerce buyers that didn't see value there. This could have been that opportunity, but instead it's a temporary thing. Why would I want to buy this DLC just to wear a Mario hat for a few weeks? Then what? I'm back to having an overpriced DLC. Apparently the market capacity for mediocre action RPGs is larger than I realize, because the Lords of the Fallen reboot was somehow successful enough to warrant a sequel. Remember a little while ago when I was talking about Onimusha 5? Here's its twin brother. All you need to do to make this Onimusha 6 is add a talking gauntlet to the main character's hand. I really don't have much left to say about games that so clearly take inspiration from anything FromSoft's produced in the past 20 years. Covered this subject many times in the past, most recently in my last video. There's derivative, and then there's a lack of creativity. How many spires do we need to include in our Gothic cathedral level so that players know we're inspired by Gothic architecture like every other dark fantasy game? As many as we can until the frame rate starts to chug on a $2,000 Nvidia card. Can we design an interesting boss fight that doesn't devolve into Z-targeted combat against a humanoid foe? Sure, just as soon as Nintendo goes back in time and stops themselves from creating Ocarina of Time. Another port. Can't say I'm a fan of digital pre-orders. Physical pre-orders made sense many years ago, but what's the purpose of pre-ordering digital content where the supply is unlimited? Sometimes you'll get a little trinket thrown in, like an outfit or some in-game currency. Maybe you can preload the game. But is that worth promising a company your money before knowing how the game will perform? In this case, you can already look up if Lies of P is worth playing, but you can't look up its performance on the Switch 2. The System Shock remake was recently ported to the Switch 2, and you'd imagine the hardware wouldn't have an issue running that game, but it's still battling performance issues. No company is worthy of your undying trust. Please wait until the game is out before casting your money into the fire.
Enjoy thrilling, high-octane combat at 60 frames per second.
60 frames per second for a 7-year-old game isn't really something to brag about, especially when the Switch 2 has a 120Hz display. Yet another port, but at least this one has some new content, if you consider alternate character colors and the Mega Man Buster new content. Capcom is aggressively pushing ports not just on the Switch, but even on Mac and cell phones. It's a way to constantly keep their name in the news even when they have nothing new to announce. They even took out an ad at Summer Game Fest to announce that they've discounted their games for the 12th time this year. I'm not speaking for anyone but myself here, but I was never in my life interested in Nintendo consoles for the third-party support. Mixing in ports of old games with new announcements is jarring, and it tapers any excitement I can muster for the new stuff. In one moment I can go, cool, new game. And in the next, cool, I played this almost a decade ago. Another port of Muramasa, and while I can appreciate getting the DLC content out of the Vita purgatory, the most exciting part of this release is seeing Vanillaware release a game on PC. The original Wii version can be emulated just fine, but Vita emulation is in a rough state, which means I occasionally need to wipe the dust off this decrepit handheld to play through one of my favorite games. Is it hypocritical of me to be happy for this port, but be critical about all these other ones? Yes, I'm a flawed man, but all of these other ports are already available on PC. It's telling that I'm more excited about a port of a Wii game from 2009 than I am for any sequel or new game. Well, Xenoblade at 60 frames per second is cool, but paying $10 so the game I bought 9 years ago can take advantage of the new hardware I paid $500 for isn't cool. Also not cool is charging $70 for this game if you don't already own the original, times 3 games. We're so far removed from the Nintendo Selects era that it feels like we're trapped in a different dimension. Nintendo refused to address their now infamous $5 Xenoblade X upgrade pack that makes the game run at 60 frames per second, but also introduces distracting shimmering when playing in handheld mode. Not sure if I have faith that these $10 upgrade packs won't follow suit, but at least when Nintendo ports a game, they feel compelled to add some extra content. I'll reserve judgment on Xenoblade 4 until it comes out. I've wanted to review the Xenoblade series for a while, and this might be an opportunity to do so. I will say that I'm not a fan of the Academy setting. Not so much the setting itself, but what it represents. The mainline series focused on young characters, but because this is a fantasy universe, the developers didn't feel compelled to have them attend school as a central component of the story. Japan's fixation with having their characters be students is growing really stale. Not asking for adult characters, though I'd certainly prefer that, but the school setting seems like an opportunity to add more nauseating, pace-breaking elements that I've grown to detest in RPGs. I'm not gonna jump the gun here, so I'll just remain cautiously observant until more footage is shown. I should just gloss over this game, but Nintendo being Nintendo means they need to show off 10 minutes of thumb wrestling to make sure this direct hits the 1 hour mark. That's representative of modern game design. Put in time-wasting filler to hit your metrics, even if it dilutes the quality of your product.
3, 2, 1.
Not gonna beat a dead horse here, but something interesting to note is that the development of this game was outsourced to an American developer named Velan Studios, known for these games. To give you an idea of how little Nintendo cares about this franchise, they've tasked an unremarkable studio with creating an unambitious remake of a game in a series that they routinely outsource. It's not even worth calling Star Fox a Nintendo franchise at this point, nor should there be any expectations of quality when there exists not a shred of consistency. At first glance, I thought this was a mobile game, because I swear I saw these character sprites before. Turns out I did. This is a port of Brave Exvius with the gacha elements removed. Well, you can take the gacha out of the mobile game, but it's still a mobile game, and not even a finished one at that. This comprises the first story arc of the gacha. I must be one of the handful of people on Earth that dislikes the HD 2D aesthetic, but I have to hand it to Square Enix. It's their signature style. In an era where every game looks the same and runs on the same engine, at the very least you can look at a screenshot of this game and tell who the publisher is immediately. I value that. What I don't value is the lifeless, sterile HUD during battles. There's a stylized look to the characters and environment, so it's jarring to see not an ounce of style in the font or menu design. I'm glad that Amano is still around to design the logo, so at least there's that. The amusing part of this announcement is that Square is selling a collector's edition on their website for $150 that doesn't include the game. If you want this with the game, it's $210, but of course that sold out. What does this include? The listing says 5 premium items, some acrylic stands, an art book, a soundtrack, and 1 trading card for their Final Fantasy trading card game that hardly anyone knows about. We're not talking about the Magic the Gathering expansion, this is their standalone product. Square calls it a highly collectible card game, but they're not really fooling anyone. I don't know about you, but I count 4 items there, unless they count the box itself as a premium item. What's remarkable to me is that despite price sensitivity being a hot topic issue this year, with console prices going up rather than down, and not by insignificant amounts, it seems like players have no issue dropping hundreds of dollars on games that come with $20 worth of product. Why does an art book, some CDs, and a lot of paper and plastic cost $150, and why are people buying this? The version with the game sold out in a few hours. I played the last Dragon Quest Monsters and this looks identical, just with 2 girls instead of 1 dude. That sounds like a joke, but it's true. I don't expect Dragon Quest to reinvent the wheel, and I don't think anyone does. This is truly a series for people that love more of the same. I thought the Dark Prince was pretty interesting because you get to play as the villain from Dragon Quest IV, and how often do you see JRPGs where you play as the villain? But this time around you play as the love interests from Dragon Quest V, so if you're a fan of Fire Emblem, you might want to get on this. Only FromSoft can assemble a collection of still event scenes, set it to a bombastic orchestral track, and have millions of people eat it up as the second coming of Christ. If there's not yet a 2-hour dissertation of the 10 seconds of footage that was shown, it'll flood the website tomorrow. In all honesty, there's nothing to say about this game because no gameplay was shown here. Can I at least give credit to FromSoft for making something that isn't another derivative of Demon's Souls? Not yet. Just because this is a multiplayer-focused title doesn't mean it won't function mechanically identical to their past games. I hope it's totally new, I really do. I want to be excited for a new game that's genuinely new, but until the network test reveals what this actually plays like, I can't say I share that same anticipation for this as the rest of the internet. I'm of the mindset that if you don't have gameplay to show, there's no point in showing a trailer at all. Clearly I'm in the minority on that, but I'm here to play games, not watch cutscenes. You know, it's really remarkable that a title designed to fill in the multiplayer shooter hole in the Wii U's heart became one of Nintendo's more successful franchises. The Nintendo stores all across Japan are filled with Splatoon merchandise, so the people really do love this series. And I'm not going to be a hater here. I like Splatoon as well. I'm a little disappointed to see that their newest game is single-player focused, but at least it's something fresh for the series. The best part of Splatoon, and why I think it's a cut above most other console shooters, is the gyro aim. Not only that it exists, but that it's implemented well, which is key. Beneath its kid-friendly aesthetic lies a series with some genuine challenge, both in its online and single-player offerings. It's refreshing to see in a crowd of games that stack unending layers of meta progression to offset difficulty. Splatoon was never a hardcore series, and it never will be, but the challenge it offers has always been satisfying to overcome, and if Nintendo can maintain that balance in Raiders, this might be one of their most consistent series. Who wants to spend $90 for a different colored ring around the sticks of their controllers? Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? We've got a story-focused trailer for a port of a 2-year-old game, and a Switch 2 port of a Switch 1 port. Once again, something that could have been announced on Nintendo's news app. Curious that these last two games had dedicated spotlights, but the newest Atelier gets a 5-second bit in this musical montage, lost in the shuffle with a smorgasbord of even more ports. Koei Tecmo couldn't afford Nintendo's rates, I guess. There's also a Tales of Eternia remaster in here somewhere. It's a blink and you'll miss it moment. Final Fantasy XIV is getting its long-unawaited Switch 2 port that will inevitably join the PS3 and PS4 versions in the graveyard in about 7 years once Square decides to stop supporting it. In the meantime, established players can look forward to paying a separate additional subscription to play this version. The existing subscription doesn't cover this because greed knows no bounds. Speaking of Square, here's what you should know. If you own the cloud version of these games on the Switch 1, they delisted today and will be completely unavailable in about a year's time. The gracious folk over at Square Enix found it prudent to offer these unfortunate players a discount to repurchase the offline version of those exact same games on the Switch 2. They don't get the Switch 2 versions for free. Their copies aren't converted to offline versions. They just lose their access. Here's a coupon. This, of course, wasn't mentioned during the Direct because who would ever advertise about such a thing? Now, I liked Kingdom Hearts for precisely one game, and that is its very first entry. Disney and Final Fantasy characters teaming up to fight evil. Weird concept, but it worked, even if it did take itself a little too seriously. Where this went south was with Chain of Memories, which should have been a simple handheld port of the original game, just with card-based combat, forever changed the direction of the series. Why did a portable game introduce so many main characters, important plot points, and become essential in understanding the setup for the proper console sequel? The longer this series went on, the less it became a marriage between Disney and Final Fantasy, and the more it became its own thing. Feels like the Disney part is a useless vestige at this point. You could take Donald and Goofy out, and would that affect the plot in any meaningful way? You could say you're not in it for the story. I know players will single out Kingdom Hearts 2 as the crown jewel of action RPG combat, but not only is that game 20 years old, it shares the spotlight with games that have considerably worse combat systems, Kingdom Hearts 3 included. Should I have any hope of Kingdom Hearts 4 resembling 2 more than it does 3? I don't think so, especially when it has the same off-putting, uncanny art style as 3. Also got to admire how Nomura still hasn't gotten over what happened to Final Fantasy Versus 13. Some of these shots look identical to the early gameplay footage of Versus 13. No gameplay footage shown, but between Star Fox and this, Nintendo's shown that they're not averse to remaking remakes, nor do they care about their remakes being one-to-one, beat-for-beat recreations. Players don't care either, they'll buy this. Given the history of Zelda remakes and remasters, I doubt the main Zelda team is working on this. This has to be another outsourced project. Grezzo handled the N64 remakes on the 3DS, and I thought those were pretty decent. I never cared for Majora's Mask, so the changes in its 3DS remake didn't faze me, but I enjoyed Ocarina of Time 3D. Neither remake was an ambitious undertaking, but because those were the first generation of remakes, I gave them a pass. This is now the second remake of Ocarina of Time, so standards should be much more stringent. If this is another beat-for-beat remake of a remake similar to Star Fox, I think it's a waste of time. I can't think of anything less exciting than yet another graphical overhaul. This game's releasing this year, allegedly, so I don't know why Nintendo opted to withhold gameplay footage. Clearly this game is close to being finished, so why cap this lackluster direct with a teaser as opposed to something meaty? My suspicion is that this is yet another faithful remake, and if that's the case, it doesn't even need to be advertised. You know exactly what you're getting, I don't really need to say much more. Everything else in this direct could have been a newsletter, an email. The one substantial announcement feels like an afterthought. I hope I'm wrong and this remake marks a substantial departure from both the original game and its first remake, because if I wanted to replay Ocarina of Time, I can already do so. It seems to me like Nintendo is intensely frightened by outsourced studios potentially staining their brands with weak sequels, so they assign them remakes as safe bets. Nintendo lacks the manpower to keep their hardware afloat with consistent exclusives, so they rely on help to produce remakes, Pokemon spin-offs, and less popular franchises like Star Fox and Metroid. They get the Nintendo seal of approval even if they aren't developed in-house, and it almost always shows. These are the filler titles in between new Zelda and Mario games, because sadly, those are taking much longer to produce nowadays. I absolutely loved the 3D Mario series, and even though the Mario team produced Bananza last year, it didn't scratch that Mario itch. I was hoping to see a new Mario game during this direct, but it's looking likely that we're not getting anything like that for a few years. I wasn't impressed by this direct. This was Nintendo's chance to show that the future of the Switch 2 looks bright. Instead, what they've presented is a dull assortment of ports, some third-party support you can get elsewhere, a few paid expansions for existing games that are years old, a limited time event, some overpriced special editions, a boring new controller color scheme, a ton of padding to hit the 1 hour mark, and remakes of remakes. It's really difficult to muster any excitement for the next year of gaming, when the one company I've relied on to sustain my interest in modern games has shown that they too are completely devoid of fresh ideas. But I don't want to end on a negative note, so I'll finish with this. If you haven't played Muramasa, I can safely recommend the upcoming port. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and the developer, Vanillaware, is one of my favorite developers. I don't love all of their games, but I absolutely love their passion. It's an independent company comprised mostly of artists, where the CEO has paid out of pocket to finish developing games on a routine basis. They have a commitment to making games with beautiful 2D animation, even in an era where most of the industry shifted to 3D long ago. I consider it a small wonder that they've lasted this long, and I'm hopeful that they'll keep producing games for many more years. When people praised Expedition 33 for being developed by a 33-man team, the first game that came to mind was Dragon's Crown, developed by an equally sized team over a decade ago, but wasn't considered an indie game for even a moment, nor was it celebrated as the savior of its genre. And in the case of Dragon's Crown, I consider it to be the finest RPG beat-em-up ever produced. I hope the port of Muramasa is successful enough to encourage Vanillaware to port Dragon's Crown to PC, mostly so I can throw my PS5 into the dumpster, but also so more people can experience that wonderful game. I may not be a huge fan of modern gaming, but I'm still a fan of video games. It's getting a little harder to find the good stuff, but it's out there.